My name is Clara, and if you've ever used a piece of sterling tech software, you've touched my work. For 15 years, I was the COO, the architect behind the curtain. I was the one who translated Milo Sterling's chaotic napkin sketches into billion-dollar product lines. My name is Clara, and if you've ever used a piece of sterling tech software, you've touched my work. He was the visionary, the tech prophet, in the black turtleneck. I was the one who made his prophecies come true. I built the systems, hired the teams, negotiated the deals, and put out the fires. He got the magazine covers. I got the satisfaction of a perfectly executed plan. For a long time, that was enough. But before you click away, thinking this is just another story about a bitter employee, I need you to do me a solid. Hit that like button and subscribe. It helps to know I'm not just talking to myself here, that there are other people out there who know what it's like to build something beautiful, only to have someone else put their name on it. Let me know I'm not alone. The day it all ended started like any other Tuesday. I was in my office, a glass box, overlooking the open plan floor, mapping out the integration strategy for our latest acquisition. It was a complex, delicate operation, a corporate transplant that required precision. My screen was a tapestry of Gantt charts, budget projections, and personnel matrices. To an outsider, it was chaos. To me, it was music. Then an email notification popped up. The subject line was bland, sterile, organizational update. The sender was Garrett. He, arrogant suit, who had taken over as CEO after Milo sold the company and cashed out for a life of keynote speeches and private islands. Garrett was everything Milo wasn't. Where Milo was a whirlwind of creative chaos, Garrett was a spreadsheet. He saw people as human resources, numbers on a balance sheet to be optimized. He had an MBA from a school that taught him how to slash costs, but not how to build value. He'd been CEO for 6 months, and in that time he'd spoken to me a grand total of 4 times, each conversation dripping with a condescension so thick you could taste it. He looked at me, with my 15 years of institutional knowledge, and saw a relic. A glorified assistant who'd gotten lucky by hitching her wagon to Milo's star. I opened the email. It was a single paragraph. My position, Chief Operating Officer, was being eliminated as part of a strategic realignment to create a flatter, more agile organizational structure. My responsibilities would be absorbed by the VP of Synergy, a 28-year-old with a good haircut and a thesaurus full of corporate buzzwords. My access would be revoked at 5 o'clock. An HR representative would be in touch regarding my severance package. It was the corporate equivalent of a mob hit. No call, no meeting, no thank you. Just a digital bullet to the back of the head. I looked through the glass of my office at the company I had built. I saw the teams I'd assembled, the workflows I'd designed, the culture I'd painstakingly nurtured. For a moment, the sound of the office, the distant hum of servers, the soft chatter, the rhythmic clicking of keyboards, faded into a dull roar. A quiet heat flushed up my neck. I minimized the email. I went back to the integration plan on my screen. I spent the next 2 hours finishing it, annotating every last detail, ensuring a seamless handover for a team that would no longer include me. It wasn't about loyalty, it was about professionalism. You don't burn down the cathedral just because you've been kicked out of the choir. You finish your part of the hymn. At 4:55 p.m., a woman from HR, I'd never seen before, appeared at my door with a cardboard box. She couldn't make eye contact. I didn't have much to pack. A framed photo of my first team, a worn copy of a book on systems architecture, a collection of pens. I packed my dignity first. As I walked toward the elevator, the entire open plan floor went silent. Every head was up. They knew. I saw pity in some eyes, fear in others. Garrett was standing near the exit, talking to the VP of Synergy, laughing about something. He glanced over at me, holding my box, and gave me a tight, dismissive little smile. It was a smile that said, "You are yesterday's news. You are irrelevant." What Garrett didn't know, what no one but Milo knew, was that my real compensation, my true value, wasn't in my salary or my bonus. In the early years, when the company was just a handful of us in a garage, fueled by cheap pizza and the sheer force of Milo's belief, we had no money. We were broke. So Milo, in a moment of desperate genius, had paid me in something else. He paid me in pieces of his personal life, in equity from his angel investments in a portfolio of tiny, struggling startups. They were lottery tickets, most of them destined to be worthless, but one of them wasn't. As the elevator doors closed on Garrett's smug face, a different kind of calm settled over me. It wasn't resignation, it was clarity. He thought he was just trimming fat, tidying up the org chart. He thought he had ended my career. He had no idea he had just handed me the weapon I would use to bring his entire world to a grinding halt. He had cast me aside, but he'd forgotten that I was the one who had helped build the very ground he was standing on. And now, he was about to find out that a piece of that ground, a critical, load-bearing piece, still belonged to me. The game wasn't over. He had just made his first move. Now, it was my turn. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and brake lights, each red glow, a small punctuation mark in the roaring silence of my car. My hands were steady on the wheel, my posture was perfect, but inside, it felt like a crucial support beam had been kicked out. I wasn't crying, I wasn't screaming. It was worse than that. It was a hollow, echoing void, where 15 years of my life used to be. The company hadn't just been a job. It was my project, my construct, the complex machine I had tuned and perfected every single day. Walking out of that building wasn't like leaving a job. It was like being evicted from my own home. I pulled into the garage of my sterile, minimalist apartment building, a place I had chosen specifically for its proximity to the office I could no longer enter. The irony was a bitter pill. I sat in the driver's seat for a long time, the engine off. Only sound the faint ticking of the cooling metal. I stared at the concrete wall. The box of my professional life sat on the passenger seat, a pathetic cardboard tombstone. When I finally went upstairs, the apartment felt vast and silent. It was a space designed for a person who was never there, someone who lived at the office and only came home to sleep. The floor-to-ceiling windows looked out over the city, a glittering web of lights and lives that felt a million miles away. I placed the box on the polished concrete floor of the living room and didn't open it. I walked to the kitchen, poured a glass of water, and watched the ice cubes crack and settle. The shock was beginning to wear off, replaced by a slow, creeping cold that started in my bones. It was the cold of humiliation. Garrett hadn't just fired me. He had erased me. He had presented my entire career as a rounding error, a line item to be deleted for efficiency. He saw me as a glorified secretary, the woman who took notes while the brilliant men had ideas. He'd never once asked me about the architecture of our logistics network, or the 9-figure deals I had personally negotiated with semiconductor suppliers in Asia, or the time I'd averted a catastrophic server meltdown with a piece of code I'd written myself over a 48-hour sleepless weekend. He didn't see any of that. He just saw a woman who had been there a long time, a piece of old furniture to be thrown out with the rest of the outdated decor. My mind started to drift backward, unspooling the years. I remembered the first office, a converted warehouse that smelled of dust and ambition. Milo was the fire, a brilliant, erratic force of nature. He could sell a vision of the future to anyone, but he couldn't remember to pay the electricity bill. I was the one who kept the lights on, literally. I was the one who built the first accounting system on a pirated copy of QuickBooks, because we couldn't afford a real one. I was the one who placated angry vendors, who hired our first 3 engineers, who wrote the first employee handbook on my kitchen table. I remembered Milo, wild-eyed with excitement, sketching the interface for what would become our flagship product, Nexus, on a pizza box. He'd slid it across the table to me and said, "Make this real, Clara." And I did. I took his scribbles and I built a roadmap. I created a process. I built a machine that could turn his chaotic genius into a stable, scalable, profitable product. And then I remembered the payments, the lean years. There was a time when we missed payroll for 3 months straight. My tiny apartment was a landscape of final notice envelopes. My diet consisted of instant noodles and the free coffee at the office. One night, Milo found me asleep at my desk, my head resting on a pile of unpaid invoices. He looked exhausted, almost broken. He sat down across from me, his usual manic energy replaced by a quiet gravity. He said, "Clara, I don't have any money. The venture capitalists are dragging their feet, but I have this." He pulled out a leather-bound folder. It was his personal portfolio. He was an obsessive angel investor, throwing tiny amounts of money at dozens of weird, improbable little tech startups. He saw them as his personal laboratory of ideas. He said, "I can't pay you what you're worth in cash, not yet, but I can pay you in the future. Pick one. Each month, instead of a proper paycheck, you can take a slice of one of these. It's a gamble," he admitted. "Most of them will probably fail. But you believe in me, right? You believe we can make this work." It was a logically questionable choice. I should have walked away. I should have found a stable job with a real salary. But his belief was infectious. And more than that, I believed in what we were building. It was a debatable emotional reason, a loyalty that bordered on foolishness. So I agreed. Every month, for almost 2 years, instead of a paycheck, I'd look through his portfolio, and he would sign over a percentage of his personal shares in some obscure startup. Most of them were ridiculous. A social network for pet owners, a smart refrigerator company. But there was one that always caught my eye. It was called Aperture Systems. It was founded by a young woman, a brilliant coder named Lena Petrova. She was a prodigy in data compression. Her idea was an algorithm that could shrink massive data packets down to a fraction of their size without any loss of fidelity. It was elegant, powerful, and years ahead of its time. I saw something in her that I saw in a younger version of myself, a quiet, obsessive competence. So every month, I chose Aperture. I kept choosing it. Month after month, my stake grew. Milo barely noticed. To him it was just one of his many little bets. To me it felt different. It felt like I was investing in a kindred spirit. Over the years, as our own company, Sterling Tech, grew into a behemoth, I kept in touch with Lena. I became her unofficial mentor. When she struggled with hiring, I gave her advice. When she needed to structure a deal, I shared my templates. We'd have coffee once or twice a year. She was intense, focused, and deeply grateful. She saw me not as Milo Sterling's COO, but as Clara, the architect who understood how things were truly built. She respected me. While Sterling Tech exploded, Aperture grew slowly, quietly, finding a niche market. Lena wasn't interested in explosive growth or flashy marketing. She was a purist, obsessed with perfecting her technology. Her compression algorithm, which she called Singularity, became the gold standard in a few highly specialized fields. It was the kind of technology that nobody knew existed, but that certain industries couldn't live without. And one of those industries was ours. When our flagship product, Nexus, reached a critical point in its development, we were dealing with an unprecedented amount of data. Our systems were choking. I remembered Lena. I remembered Aperture. I brought them in. We structured a licensing deal. Milo was so busy with a press tour that he barely even read the contract. He just trusted me to handle it. Negotiated a perpetual license for Singularity to be embedded deep in the core of Nexus. It became the secret engine that made our product faster, more efficient, and more powerful than any of our competitors. It was our hidden advantage. And because I had been scrupulous about avoiding a conflict of interest, I had fully disclosed my personal stake in Aperture during the negotiations. The lawyers had approved it, documenting it in a file that was now probably buried in a digital archive somewhere, forgotten by everyone but me. Standing in my silent apartment, the cold in my bones began to transform. It was no longer the cold of humiliation. It was the cold of a machine coming online. The cold of pure, distilled resolve. Garrett had called me a relic, a glorified assistant. He had no idea that the entire multi-billion-dollar Nexus platform, the crown jewel of the company he now ran, was utterly dependent on a piece of software created by a tiny startup. A startup in which, thanks to 2 years of missed paychecks and a misplaced sense of loyalty, I had quietly, over the years, become the majority shareholder. My stake had grown to 54%. The hollow void inside me began to fill, not with anger but with purpose. A plan began to form, not a messy emotional tantrum, but a clean, elegant architectural solution. Garrett had made a critical miscalculation. He had assessed my value based on my job title, not on the foundations I had laid. He thought he was playing checkers, moving pieces off the board. He was about to find out we were playing a very different game, and I had been setting up the board for 15 years. It wasn't about revenge. I kept telling myself that. It was about correcting a calculation error. Garrett had underestimated my value. I was simply going to present him with an accurate invoice, and that invoice was about to come due. The shift from despair to action is a quiet one. It doesn't happen with a thunderclap. It happens with the click of a mouse, the opening of a file. The morning after my dismissal, I didn't sleep in or wallow. I was up at 5 a.m., my usual time, a habit etched into my nervous system by 15 years of dawn patrol crisis management. But instead of driving to the office, I walked to the small spare bedroom I'd always intended to turn into a proper home office. It was where forgotten things lived. I opened a closet and pulled out a sleek, matte black laptop, not my company-issued machine, which was now a useless brick, but my personal device. I powered it on. The screen glowed to life, showing a clean, encrypted desktop. This was my real workspace, the digital sanctum where I kept my private world. On the desktop was a single, password-protected folder labeled Portfolio. Inside it was a meticulous record of every share certificate Milo had ever signed over to me, digitized and authenticated. It was a graveyard of failed startups and forgotten dreams, but there, shining among the debris, was the file for Aperture Systems. I opened it. 54%, majority control. The legal documents were all there, pristine and irrefutable, time-stamped and countersigned by Milo himself, his flamboyant signature, a relic of a past built on trust and desperation. For a moment I felt a pang of something for Milo. He had trusted me, and now I was about to use that trust as a weapon against the company he had created. But he had sold it. He had walked away. He'd left it in the hands of a man like Garrett. The company that existed now wasn't the one we had built in that dusty warehouse. It was just a name, a brand, a vessel that had cast me out. My loyalty was to the work, not to the name on the building. My next step was to call Lena Petrova. I knew she would have heard the news. Tech is a small world, and the departure of a C-level executive, especially one as tenured as I was, travels fast. I dialed her number, and she picked up on the first ring. Her voice was clipped, angry. "Clara, I heard what happened. It's disgusting. Are you okay?" The genuine concern in her voice was a balm on a raw wound. "I'm fine, Lena," I said, my own voice calmer than I felt. "I'm more than fine. I'm calling about Aperture." There was a pause on the other end. "Okay," she said slowly, her tone shifting from personal concern to professional curiosity. "What about it?" "I need you to send me a copy of the Sterling Tech licensing agreement for the Singularity algorithm," I said. "The original one, and all subsequent renewals. I have my copy, of course, but I want to see the one from your side, just to be thorough." I could almost hear the gears turning in her brilliant mind. She knew me. I wasn't one for small talk or idle requests. Every action had a purpose. "I'm sending it now," she said, encrypted. "Is there anything else?" Her question hung in the air, pregnant with unspoken possibilities. "Yes," I said. "Tell me about your relationship with them now." "With Garrett's people." Lena let out a short, bitter laugh. "Garrett's people," she scoffed. "They're idiots. They treat us like a utility company. They pay the bill late every quarter, and the only time I hear from their technical liaison is when they need a patch for something their own engineers broke. Last month they tried to get me to lower the licensing fee, said it was part of a company-wide cost efficiency initiative. I told them the price is the price. The man on the phone, some VP of something or other, told me I should be grateful for their business. He said Aperture was lucky to be working with a market leader like Sterling Tech. I had to remind him that without my algorithm, their market-leading product would have the processing speed of a toaster oven. He didn't like that. This was perfect, better than I could have hoped. Garrett's arrogance wasn't just reserved for me. It was a company-wide policy. He was bleeding goodwill from every pore. "How are you doing otherwise, Lena?" I asked, shifting the focus. I knew Aperture had been struggling to land a second major client. They were too niche, too specialized. Their financial stability was almost entirely dependent on the Sterling Tech contract. It was their golden goose, and their single point of failure. She hesitated. "We're lean," she admitted. "The Sterling contract keeps the lights on, but it doesn't fund the R&D I need to build the next generation of Singularity. I have ideas, Clara, big ones, but I'm stuck. We're treading water." Her frustration was palpable. She was an artist who was being paid to only ever paint one picture, over and over again. I let the silence sit for a moment before I played my card. "Lena, as you know, I'm the majority shareholder in your company. Legally, I control the board, and as the controlling party, I am going to make an executive decision. Aperture Systems is not going to renew the Singularity license with Sterling Tech." There was a sharp intake of breath on the other end of the line. "Clara, what are you saying? That's our only major revenue stream. It would kill us." "No, it won't," I said, my voice steady, projecting a confidence I was manufacturing in real time. "It will liberate you. I'm not going to let your company die. I'm going to make it thrive. But first, we have to cut the cord. I have a plan, Lena, a very detailed one. But I need to know if you're with me. It's a risk, a huge one, but the potential upside is significant for both of us." She was silent for a full 30 seconds. I could picture her in her Spartan office, staring at a whiteboard full of complex equations, weighing the variables. She was a logician. She dealt in data and probabilities. But I also knew she was fiercely loyal. I had mentored her. I had believed in her when no one else did. This wasn't just a business decision for her, it was a personal one. "Okay," she finally said, her voice low but firm. "I'm in. What do we do?" A wave of relief washed over me, so potent it almost made me dizzy. I had my most important ally. Without her, this would have been a hostile, ugly battle. With her, it was a partnership, an alliance. The rest of the day was a blur of strategic activity. First, I called my lawyer, a sharp, no-nonsense woman named Evelyn, who specialized in corporate intellectual property law. I'd used her for years to vet Sterling Tech's contracts. She was expensive, but she was a shark, and right now, I needed a shark. I walked her through the situation, my dismissal, my majority stake in Aperture, the critical dependency of the Nexus product, and Garrett's belligerent management style. Evelyn was quiet as I laid it all out, only interjecting with precise, clarifying questions. When I was done, there was a pause. Then I heard her let out a low whistle. "Clara," she said, her voice a mix of professional admiration and legal glee. "This is the cleanest case of turnkey leverage I have ever seen. It's beautiful. It's a corporate guillotine." She confirmed my legal standing. As the majority shareholder, I had the absolute right to direct the company's strategic decisions, including the termination of a licensing agreement upon its renewal date. The fact that I had disclosed my conflict of interest years ago made my position legally unassailable. They couldn't sue me for breach of fiduciary duty to Sterling Tech, because I no longer worked there, and they couldn't sue me for my actions as a shareholder of Aperture, because those actions, while devastating to them, could be legally framed as being in the best long-term interest of Aperture itself, freeing it from dependency on a single domineering client. It was almost too perfect. Garrett's arrogance, his belief that I was just a relic, was the very thing that had blinded him. He'd never thought to conduct a risk analysis on the woman he was firing. He'd never bothered to look into the intricate web of dependencies and relationships that I had spent a decade and a half weaving. He saw a fly and swatted it, not realizing the fly was tethered to the main power switch. My instructions to Evelyn were simple. We would do nothing for now. We would wait. The current license for Singularity was set to auto-renew on the 1st of the month, which was just under 3 weeks away. The contract stipulated that either party could provide a notice of non-renewal with a minimum of 14 days' notice. We would wait until exactly 15 days before the renewal date. Then, Evelyn would draft a formal, legally ironclad notice of non-renewal on behalf of Aperture Systems and deliver it to Sterling Tech's general counsel, not to Garrett, to the lawyers. We would be professional, we would be precise, and we would be silent. Next, I worked with Lena to prepare Aperture for the storm. We wargamed the financial impact. I told her I would personally provide a bridge loan from my own savings to cover their operational expenses for the next 6 months. It would be a significant chunk of my liquid assets, but it was a necessary investment. This wasn't just about my own vindication anymore. It was about Lena's future. Her loyalty deserved my protection. We mapped out a new business development strategy, targeting companies and industries, aerospace, genetic sequencing, financial modeling, that desperately needed her technology, but didn't know it existed yet. For years, the Sterling Tech contract had made her complacent. Now, with the fire lit under her, Lena's ambition was unleashed. She was energized, excited. She was finally free to build her own empire, not just service someone else's. As I shut down my laptop that night, the city lights twinkling outside my window, the cold feeling was completely gone. It was replaced by a quiet, humming energy, the feeling an architect gets when the blueprints are finalized and the foundation is ready to be poured. And Sattergad, Garrett thought he had pushed me out into the cold. He didn't realize he had just pushed me into my own command center. He had seen me as a loyal subordinate, a functionary. He failed to understand my true nature. I wasn't a soldier, I was a strategist, and the war had just begun. This wasn't about revenge, it was about re-establishing equilibrium. It was about demonstrating, in the clearest possible terms, the true market value of the woman he had dismissed as a relic. The next 2 weeks were the quiet before the storm. I spent my days in a state of hyper-focused calm. I went to the gym. I read books on subjects that had nothing to do with technology. I reconnected with old friends I had neglected for years, too busy putting out fires at the office. On the surface, I was a woman enjoying a forced and generously funded sabbatical. But underneath, every tick of the clock was a countdown. Inside Sterling Tech, I knew it would be business as usual. Garrett would be swaggering through meetings, talking about synergy and disruption, completely oblivious to the ticking time bomb under his desk. My only window into that world was a young data analyst named Maria. I had hired her right out of college and mentored her. She was smart, ambitious, and fiercely loyal. She had sent me a text the day after I was fired. "This is wrong. The whole floor knows it. Let me know if you need anything at all." I hadn't replied, not wanting to put her in a difficult position. But now, she was my periscope. I didn't ask her for proprietary data or trade secrets. That would be crossing a line. I just asked her to tell me about the mood, the vibe, as she called it. Her reports, delivered via a secure messaging app, painted a grim picture. Garrett was a whirlwind of disruption, but not in the way he intended. He had dismantled teams that worked perfectly, citing a need for dynamic restructuring. He had implemented a new project management software that no one understood, leading to missed deadlines and widespread confusion. The VP of Synergy, my replacement, was a master of PowerPoint presentations, but had zero operational knowledge. Maria described a meeting where he couldn't answer a basic question about their server architecture. Garrett had covered for him, dismissing the question as getting lost in the weeds. "The noise was deafening," Maria wrote. "All talk, no signal. The place is running on muscle memory, but the muscles are starting to atrophy." It was exactly as I expected. Garrett was a classic hollow suit. He knew the language of management, but he didn't understand the mechanics of work. He was trying to fly a complex aircraft by reading the marketing brochure instead of the flight manual, and I was the one who had written the flight manual. Then came the day, 15 days before the license renewal, D-Day. At 9 a.m. sharp, I sent a single encrypted message to my lawyer, Evelyn, execute. At 9:30 a.m., a certified courier delivered a crisp formal envelope to the office of Sterling Tech's general counsel. Inside was a single piece of paper. It was a notice of non-renewal for the Aperture Systems Singularity license, effective on the 1st of the following month. It was polite, professional, and utterly devastating. Evelyn had a notification system set up. She texted me the moment the package was signed for. Delivered. Now we waited for the ripples to spread. I knew the general counsel, a cautious man named David, wouldn't panic immediately. He would first try to understand the situation. He would pull the original contract. He would see the non-renewal clause. He would then look up Aperture Systems. He would see it as a small dependent vendor. His first assumption would be that this was a negotiating tactic, that this tiny company was trying to squeeze them for a higher licensing fee. It was a logical and completely wrong assumption. According to Maria's intel later that day, that's exactly what happened. David the lawyer walked into Garrett's office around noon. Through her network of office gossip, Maria pieced together the conversation. Garrett had apparently laughed. He called it a pathetic shakedown. He told David to offer them a 10% increase and tell them to stop wasting his time. "Don't worry," he'd said. "I'll handle this. These little guys always fold." Garrett, in his infinite arrogance, didn't call Lena. He delegated it. He had the VP of Synergy, my unqualified replacement, make the call. Lena was prepared. I had coached her for this exact moment. She described the call to me later that evening, her voice laced with a grim satisfaction. The VP, a man named Kyle, had been condescending from the start. He'd opened with some smarmy line about how he hoped they could continue their mutually beneficial partnership. Lena had simply stated, "We are not renewing the license." Kyle had then made the 10% offer, as if he were bestowing a great gift. Lena had politely declined. Kyle, clearly not used to being told no, got flustered. He'd said, "Maybe you don't understand. Sterling Tech is your biggest client. This is a very generous offer. You should take it." Lena's reply was icy. "Maybe you don't understand, mister." She made a point of pretending to forget his name. "Kyle, our decision is final. We are no longer interested in licensing our proprietary technology to your company. Please direct all future correspondence to our legal counsel." Then she hung up. The panic didn't set in immediately. According to Maria, the mood in the executive suite for the next few days was one of annoyed disbelief. Garrett was angry, furious that some tiny vendor was defying him. He saw it as a personal insult, a challenge to his authority. He ordered his legal team to find a way to force the renewal, find a loophole, he demanded, sue them for breach of contract. But there was no loophole. The contract was ironclad, and they couldn't sue for breach, because Aperture wasn't breaching anything. They were simply exercising their contractual right, not to renew. The real panic began about a week later. It started in the engineering department. A senior architect, one of the few veterans left who understood the deep systems, realized the implications. He must have sent an all-caps, red-flagged email up the chain of command. An email that explained in simple, terrifying terms what the singularity algorithm actually did. It wasn't a nice-to-have feature. It wasn't a plug-in. It was a fundamental component of the Nexus data processing core. Removing it wasn't like taking a tire off a car. It was like trying to remove the pistons from the engine while it was running. The entire Nexus platform, the product that generated over 80% of the company's revenue, would cease to function, not degrade. Cease to function. Suddenly, it wasn't a pathetic shakedown anymore. It was an existential threat. Maria described the shift in the office atmosphere as a sudden drop in barometric pressure before a hurricane. The executive floor went from noisy arrogance to a tense, terrified silence. Meetings were happening behind closed doors. Voices were raised. Garrett was seen pacing in his office, his face pale. He had gone from laughing at the problem to being consumed by it. He tried to call Lena again himself, multiple times. She followed our plan and didn't answer. She let every call go to voicemail. His messages, which Lena forwarded to me, were a case study in unraveling bravado. The first one was commanding, "Call me back immediately. We need to discuss this." The second was pleading, "Lena, I think there's been a misunderstanding. Let's just have a conversation." The third was desperate. "Please, just tell us what you want. Whatever it is, we can make it happen. Just name your price." But it was never about price. It wasn't about a negotiation. This was a controlled demolition. Garrett was finally starting to understand that he wasn't in a boardroom. He was in a minefield, and he had no idea where the mines were buried. The beautiful part was, he still didn't know I was involved. He was fighting a shadow. In his mind, this was all coming from some stubborn, irrational little startup founder. He had no idea that the architect of his misery was sitting in a quiet apartment across town, reading a novel and waiting for the structure to fall. He had dismissed me as a relic. He was about to learn that relics have a way of becoming historical artifacts, and some artifacts are cursed. The day the license expired was a Friday. I woke up with a feeling of profound, almost unnerving, peace. The final piece of the plan was in motion, and it was now completely out of my hands. It was a purely technical process. At 12:01 a.m., an automated kill switch in the licensing server at Aperture Systems would deactivate Sterling Tech's authentication key. The singularity algorithm, embedded deep within the Nexus code, would make a final check-in, receive no validation, and become inert. The flagship product of Sterling Tech would hit a brick wall at the speed of light. The first sign of the fallout came not from my ally Maria, but from the public domain. Around 9:15 a.m., I saw Sterling Tech begin trending on social media. The comments were a torrent of confusion and fury. "My Nexus platform is down. Can't access my data. What's happening? #Sterling down." It was a digital firestorm. Their support lines would be overwhelmed. Their entire client base, from small businesses to Fortune 500 companies, was dead in the water. Every minute of downtime was costing their customers millions of dollars and costing Sterling Tech a piece of its reputation that it would never get back. Maria's message came through a few minutes later. It was a single sentence: "Total chaos. The building feels like it's on fire." I could picture the scene perfectly. The frantic engineers in the war room, a term Garrett probably loved to use, staring at lines of code that made no sense. They'd be looking for a bug, a server failure, a denial of service attack. They would be treating it as an external problem, because the alternative, that it was an internal self-inflicted wound, was too terrifying to contemplate. Garrett would be screaming at people, demanding answers no one had. He was a captain whose ship had suddenly stopped in the middle of the ocean, and he didn't even know how to read a compass. Around noon, my phone rang. It was a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was from Seattle, home of Omnicorp, Sterling Tech's largest and most important client. I had personally negotiated the Omnicorp deal 5 years ago. I answered. "Clara, is that you?" "It's John Varys, from Omnicorp." His voice was strained. I remembered John well, a sharp, no-nonsense chief technology officer who valued competence above all else. "Yes, John, it's been a while. How are you?" "How am I?" he said with a humorless laugh. "Clara, my entire logistics network has been down for 3 hours. The platform we pay your former company 7 figures a year for is a very expensive brick. I've been on the phone with that new guy, Garrett. The man is a complete incompetent. He's talking about unprecedented network anomalies. He has no idea what's going on, does he?" "No, John," I said calmly. "I don't believe he does." There was a pause. John was smart. He could connect dots. The timing of my departure, the sudden catastrophic failure, the incompetence of the new leadership. He was putting it together. Clara, he said, his voice lowering. This has your fingerprints all over it, doesn't it? But not in the way they think. You wouldn't be this sloppy. This is precise. This feels like a switch was flipped. I didn't confirm or deny. I just let the silence hang there. He continued. I always told Milo that you were the one actually running the place. He should have given you the keys to the kingdom instead of selling out to these private equity vultures. It's a lot of you were God. He continued abandative. Hiamamuandeas of Ipruzio. Listen, Clara. I don't know what you're doing now, but when this dust settles, Omnicorp is going to need a new data solutions provider, a stable one run by someone who knows how to build things that don't just collapse. My new company doesn't exist yet, I told him. He chuckled. When it does, call me. The offer is on the table. We'll be your first client. That call was the turning point. It wasn't just about the schadenfreude of watching Garrett panic. It was about validation. It was a powerful external confirmation of my true worth. Garrett had tried to erase my value, and here was our most important client, effectively telling me that I was the value. The company wasn't the brand or the logo. It was the competence of the people who built it. Meanwhile, back at the Sterling Tech madhouse, Garrett was finally forced to make his desperate counter. The general counsel must have finally connected the dots between the non-renewal notice and the system failure. Around 3 p.m., an email landed in my lawyer's inbox. It was from Garrett. Not his lawyer, but Garrett himself. It was a panicked, rambling mess. He offered to triple the licensing fee for Aperture. He offered a multi-year guaranteed contract. He apologized for any misunderstandings. It was the desperate plea of a drowning man. Evelyn, my lawyer, called me. What's our response? She asked. I told her. No response. Absolute silence. Let him drown a little longer. The final pathetic move came late that evening. A direct email from Garrett to my personal account, an address he must have gotten from some old HR file. The subject line was, "Let's talk." The message was a complete reversal of his entire persona. Clara, I admit, I may have misjudged the situation. I am prepared to offer you your old job back. KOO, with a significant raise and a bonus package. Let's put this behind us and get the company back on track. Your company. I stared at the email, at the words your company. The sheer, unmitigated gall of it was breathtaking. He had fired me with a cold, impersonal email, managed me out with a pathetic severance, dismissed me as a relic. And now, after driving the company off a cliff, he was offering me the chance to come back and clean up his mess. He still didn't get it. He thought my job, my title, was what I wanted. He thought he could buy my compliance. He didn't understand that the power had shifted. I didn't need the title of COO at his broken company. I held the kill switch. He wasn't offering me a seat at his table. He was begging me to let him into mine. I deleted the email without replying. The silence, I knew, would be a far more powerful answer than any words I could write. The call came on Monday morning, not from Garrett, but from his assistant, a young woman who sounded like she was on the verge of tears. Mr. Sterling, she still called him that, a force of habit. No, Mr. Garrett, she corrected herself, would like to request a meeting with you, as soon as possible, to discuss the Aperture Systems matter. I let the silence stretch for a moment, savoring the role reversal. The man who had deemed me not worthy of a 5-minute conversation to fire me was now formally requesting an audience. I'm available to meet tomorrow at 10, I said. I will have my counsel present. Please have Mr. Garrett meet us at the offices of Pierce, Cromwell, and Dean. I gave her the address of Evelyn's top-tier law firm. The location was a strategic choice. This would not be a meeting on his turf or even on neutral ground. This would be a meeting in my fortress, surrounded by my power. There will be a pre-agreed agenda, I added. The sole item for discussion will be the terms of a potential new licensing agreement for the Singularity software. All other topics are off the table. She stammered a yes, and the call ended. The next morning, I walked into the main conference room at Evelyn's firm. It was a space designed to communicate quiet, unshakable power. dark wood, supple leather chairs, and a panoramic view of the city skyline. It was a room where fortunes were made and empires were dismantled. I was calm. This wasn't a confrontation. It was a transaction. It wasn't about revenge. It was about defining the new reality. Garrett arrived exactly at 10. He didn't look like the arrogant, swaggering CEO I remembered. His expensive suit was rumpled. There were dark circles under his eyes. He looked like a man who hadn't slept in 3 days, which was probably true. He walked in alone, without his own lawyer, a foolish move that signaled just how desperate he was. He saw me sitting at the head of the long table, with Evelyn by my side, and for a split second, a flicker of his old condescending anger flared in his eyes, but it was quickly extinguished by a wave of pure desperation. He sat down opposite me. He started to speak, some rambling preamble about shared history and common goals. Evelyn cut him off. "Mr. Garrett," she said, her voice like chipping ice, "we have a clear agenda. My client is prepared to hear your offer for a new license. Let's not waste time with platitudes." Garrett's jaw tightened. He looked at me. "Clara," he said, trying to force a tone of collegial reasonableness, "let's be realistic. What do you want?" I leaned forward slightly. This was the moment, the culmination of 15 years of quiet competence and 3 weeks of calculated silence. "I want nothing, Garrett," I said, my voice even and low. "I'm not here to ask for anything. You, on the other hand, require a critical piece of technology to save your company from complete collapse. The company you bought, the company whose most vital operational asset you fired without a second thought. So the question isn't what I want. The question is, what are you prepared to offer Aperture Systems in exchange for its survival?" I had framed it perfectly. This wasn't about me, it was about the company I now controlled. My actions were not personal retaliation. They were the strategic decisions of a majority shareholder, acting in her company's best interest. Garrett was cornered and he knew it. He finally capitulated. He named a number, a licensing fee that was 5 times the original. Evelyn just raised an eyebrow. He doubled it, 10 times the original fee. "That's a good starting point for the financial terms," Evelyn said, coolly. "Now for the structural components." Garrett looked confused. "Structural?" I slid a single sheet of paper across the table. It was a list of my non-negotiable terms. First, the license would not be perpetual. It would be a 1-year term, with an option to renew based on Aperture's sole discretion. We would hold the power, always. Second, Sterling Tech would prepay the entire 12-month fee upfront, within 24 hours. No more late payments. Third, Sterling Tech would issue a public press release, drafted by us, announcing a new strategic partnership with Aperture Systems, acknowledging Aperture's technology as a core component of the Nexus platform's success. This was about correcting the public record, about giving Lena and Aperture the recognition they deserved. And then there was the final term, the one just for me. "Fourth," I said, looking him directly in the eye, "a permanent seat on the Sterling Tech Board of Directors will be granted to a representative of Aperture Systems, effective immediately, and that representative will be me." Garrett stared at the paper, then at me. His face went from pale to ghostly white. "You can't be serious," he whispered. "A board seat? That's impossible." "It's the only way the Nexus platform comes back online," I replied. "The choice is yours, Garrett. Agree to the terms, or start drafting your company's obituary. Checkmate." He sat there for a long time, the paper trembling slightly in his hand. He looked defeated, broken, a man completely stripped of his power, forced to negotiate for his survival with the relic he had thrown in the trash. Finally, he slumped in his chair and nodded. "Fine," he croaked. "You win." I stood up. I didn't smile. I didn't offer a handshake. "Evelyn will send over the final documents this afternoon," I said. "I expect them to be signed and returned by the end of the day." And Garrett, he looked up, his eyes hollow. "Never underestimate the people who build the things that make you look like a genius." Then I turned and walked out of the room, leaving him alone at the table in the new reality I had just created. The story doesn't end with me gloating over Garrett's defeat. In fact, He became irrelevant almost immediately. He signed the deal, the money was wired, and the Singularity license was reactivated. The Nexus platform came back online, but the damage was done. The story of the catastrophic failure and the subsequent strategic partnership with a tiny unknown company ripped through the tech industry. Clients had lost trust. The board of directors, now with me on it, launched an internal investigation into Garrett's managerial oversight. 2 months later, he was quietly fired. They didn't even give him a pathetic severance package. They just showed him the door. My new life began. I took my seat on the board of the company that had cast me aside. From that position, I could protect the integrity of the technology and the people who actually built it. I could prevent another Garrett from ever taking the helm. But my real passion, my real work, was with Aperture. With the influx of capital from the new Sterling Tech deal and the massive publicity, Aperture transformed. We hired a sales team. We invested heavily in R&D. Lena was finally free to work on the next generation of her algorithm. We landed new clients, big ones, including John Veris from Omnicorp, who was true to his word. Within a year, Aperture Systems was no longer a small dependent vendor. It was a rising power in the tech world, a testament to what can happen when true talent is finally given the resources and the freedom to thrive. I never went back to being a COO. I had a new role, one I created for myself, an architect of potential. I invested in other small startups run by brilliant, overlooked founders, mostly women. I became the mentor I had always been. But now I had the capital and the network to make a real structural difference. My name wasn't on the cover of magazines, but it was on the cap tables of a dozen innovative new companies. I was building a new kind of empire, not one of bluster and ego, but one of quiet competence, mutual respect, and shared success. And that's the real moral of this story. It was never about revenge, it was about value. In the corporate world, so many people, especially women, are taught to be indispensable but invisible. We are told to do the work, to be the backbone, and to wait for our turn to be recognized. But what I learned is that you can't wait for someone else to value you correctly. Sometimes you have to issue the invoice yourself. You have to be willing to demonstrate your worth in terms so clear they cannot be ignored. So if you are out there, feeling overlooked, underestimated, or erased in your own career, I want you to remember this. Your knowledge, your experience, your relationships, that is your true portfolio. It's the leverage you hold. Don't ever let anyone convince you that you are just a relic, a glorified assistant, or a line item on a spreadsheet. You are the architect. You built the foundation, and you have the power to decide who gets to build on it. Your worth is not defined by the title someone else gives you. It's defined by the value you create. And sometimes the only way to make them see that is to turn off the lights and show them what it's like to live in the world you built, without you in it. Thank you for listening to my story. If it resonated with you, if you've ever felt that sting of being undervalued, please do me a favor. Like this video, leave a comment below, and share your own experiences. I read every one. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you don't miss what comes next. It helps to know we're all in this together. Building a world where competence, not connections, is the currency that truly matters.